Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Sandy Smith, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Private Ashley Shivers. This evening, we warmly welcome the family of Petty Officer Cook S. John Stanley Davey, who are watching the live stream of this ceremony, and their representatives who are in attendance. His story will be told shortly. We also welcome Mr. Dennis Lyons, representing the Naval Association of Australia ACT Division. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by representatives of the family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, I now invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Visitors who are able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Petty Officer Cook John Stanley Davey. John Davey was born on the 5th of July 1901 in St Kilda, Melbourne, one of 8 children born to George and Maria Davey. Known as Jack, he was educated at Brighton Road State School and joined the Royal Australian Navy aged 17 on the 6th of January 1919, signing on for 7 years. Mustered as a cook and given the rank of 3rd cook's mate, Jack began training at HMAS Cerberus. Promoted to 2nd cook's mate, then assistant cook, Jack's first seagoing posting was to HMAS Encounter, a training ship, in January 1920. Now with the rank of cook, over the next 4 years, Jack served on His Majesty's Australian ships Margaret, Franklin, Sydney 1 and Australia, before returning to the Cerberus Shore establishment. Promoted to leading cook, Jack served on Melbourne and Platypus Stalwart in 1924. Achieving the rank of Petty Officer Cook in March 1925, Davey was attached to the British depot and travelled for England for the transfer of the Royal Navy minesweeper HMS Silvio to the Royal Australian Navy and commissioning as HMAS Moresby. Away at sea for over 6 months, Davey then had short postings at HMAS Penguin and to HMAS Parramatta and Brisbane. In 1926, Davey joined the ship's company of HMAS Geranium. He served on this sloop for 8 months in Northern Australian waters. Having been extended by 3 months, John Davey's 7-year tenure was up. He re-enlisted in the Royal Australian Fleet Reserve. The same year, Jack married Marion Bland in October. Their first daughter, Lorraine, was born in 1927, and a second daughter, Melva, in 1928. Tragedy struck the young family, and both Jack's wife and daughters died of tuberculosis in 1929. Jack continued his work in the Navy as a shore-based cook at HMAS Cerberus for the next 8 years. He remarried in 1931. Discharging from the Navy the following year, Jack took on many jobs during the Depression. He and his wife Linda had 4 children: John, Jean Margaret, Stanley, and Bruce. As war clouds gathered, John was recalled for duty in the Royal Australian Navy on the 31st of August, 1939. For a year and a half, he was stationed at Cerberus and then posted to Penguin whilst he waited to join the crew of HMAS Sydney 2. Sydney and her crew had operated with distinction in the war, undertaking many celebrated actions, including the sinking of the Italian cruisers Aspero and Bartolomeo Colleoni. Sydney returned to Australia in February 1941 to much public celebration and acclaim, but the respite did not last long, and Sydney returned to patrol and escort duties. Jack joined the ship in early 1941 and sailed for Fremantle in March. Sydney was operating off the Western Australian coast, escorting convoys from Fremantle to the Sunda Strait in the Netherlands East Indies. Arriving at Sunda Strait, Sydney would hand the convoy over to other Allied warships, which would then continue escorting the ships to Singapore. On the 11th of November 1941, Sydney steamed from Fremantle, escorting the troop ship Zealandia, carrying troops of the Australian 8th Division. On the 17th of November, Sydney handed the escort over to HMS Durban before commencing the return passage to Fremantle. On the afternoon of the 19th of November 1941, after months of reports of missing vessels and intermittent sightings of unidentified vessels in the area, Sydney sighted what appeared to be a merchant ship some 200 kilometres west of Shark Bay, Western Australia, and closed to investigate. Sydney signalled the mysterious ship to identify itself whilst continuing to approach. The vessel replied that it was the Dutch steamer Straat Malacca and feigned a distress code to add to the deception, but could not provide the allotted secret call sign in response to Sydney's demands to confirm her identity. Sydney drew closer, relinquishing her advantage of superior gunnery and of range, unaware that she was approaching the heavily armed German merchant raider HSK Cormoran in disguise. Cormoran had already sunk 10 merchant ships in the Indian Ocean and taken another as a prize. When Sydney was about 900 yards on his starboard beam, the German raiders' captain ordered the immediate hoisting of the German battle ensign and opened fire with guns and torpedoes. Sydney returned fire in kind, and in the ensuing battle conducted at point-blank range, both ships were badly damaged. The surviving crew of Cormoran abandoned ship and the raider was scuttled. Almost 3/4 of her crew survived to become prisoners of war. Sydney, listing heavily and ablaze from torpedo and gunfire, sank during the early hours on the 20th of November, 1941, with the loss of all 645 members on board. With no grave but the sea, Petty Officer Cook, Jack Davey, and his shipmates are commemorated on the Plymouth Naval Memorial, England, among thousands of others with no known grave. He was 40 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Petty Officer Cook, John Stanley Davey, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They have no grave but the cruel sea. No flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, a fast on the ocean bed. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.